Asphalt Anthropology is how safety expert Beverly Baker describes the awareness and mental fortitude needed to stay safe in dense urban environments. Learning these key skills doesn't just make you safer, it unlocks access to some of the most interesting parts of the world. If you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe, and do come find us on Facebook or sign up at Patreon for early access and member-only goodies. Thank you for watching. Now let's get to work. I'd like to introduce you all to two close personal friends of the show. John and John are a pair of law enforcement officers with 3 decades of combined experience in helping people stay safe and what happens when that fails. They've built a shop, Shield Protection Products, that offers a full range of self-defense items like pepper spray and stun guns that real people can use in the real world. They're like-minded folks, so they also offer important safety equipment like fire extinguishers, medical kits, and car escape tools. They provide an instructional video with every purchase so you know how to use anything you buy. Find them at shieldprotectionproducts.com and use the discount code SFOTB10 to get 10% off of your purchase. That's SFOTB10 at shieldprotectionproducts.com. Seriously, friends, if you're looking for the best equipment to keep your family safe, along with advice from knowledgeable professionals on how to use it, while supporting this show and a small business that deserves it, you'll find it at Shield Protection Products. Go check them out and tell them Safest Family on the Block sent you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and with me today is Beverly Baker of Asphalt Anthropology. Hello, Beverly.
Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, it is absolutely our privilege. Now, Beverly here is a student and an observer of violence dynamics. She began her education as a girl with wanderlust, undeterred by tales of the boogeyman. She's dodged peril and outwitted threats on the streets of major American cities in Europe, former Eastern Bloc, and South Africa. She's developed and taught personal safety courses for LAPD's Community Police Academy, corporations, LA's Skid Row. Now, is that the band or the organization?
That would be fun if it was the band, but no, the area, the community.
Oh, okay.
Now I'm curious about working with the band.
As well as women's shelters, colleges, universities, public school districts, and the general public for more than 20 years. She has a second dan black belt with Cha Yun Ryu martial arts, and over the past 30 years has studied various martial arts, including traditional Asian arts, Krav Maga, and boxing. She currently trains in judo. Beverly is a volunteer escort at a healthcare clinic where she observes and physically manages the principles of conflict on the front lines where politics and religion collide. And she holds a BA in sociology from the University of Texas at Austin and an MBA with a focus in digital media management. So you've been here and you've been there and you've lived to tell the tale, which is impressive in its own right. And one of the things I really noticed about your bio is one of the dirty secrets of the self-defense industry is we don't really have any experts by the standards of most other industries. An expert chef, for example, has cooked 10,000 steaks. An expert mechanic has changed oil 1,000 times. Anybody who's been in 1,000 physical altercations is not somebody I want within 100 yards of me. So you find people who've lived the life as best they can, and those are the people who can bring the most expertise to the general public. And you're on the show today to talk about myths and misconceptions about self-defense.
Yeah. So I'm really excited that you reached out to have this conversation. I've been thinking about it since we've spoken, and I've jotted down a few things that I wanted to talk about with you, Jason. And the first 3 are kind of big, broad picture, if you will. It's like, how do we think of the challenge? How do we think of the problem of personal safety, of self-defense? Like, what problem are we really wanting to solve? That's the business person in me. It's like, I don't want to solve problems that don't exist. In terms of, they might feel like they exist, but there's really there's no interest, there's no challenge there. And as you were reading my bio, I hadn't heard that in a little bit, and I was like, yeah, it was like, as a kid, I was out kind of defying some of the things that my parents were wanting me to do, places they wanted me to go. And not to say that I didn't have run-ins, but I was able to successfully navigate that cat caller who was scary and slow down his car, or, riding the L train into Philly and things like that. So I feel like, knock on wood, I know luck has a lot to do with it, but as a self-defense instructor, as you mentioned, I've been teaching self-defense for over 20 years, got into it through the route of martial arts, because that's generally, to your point, that's where the experts, quote unquote, a lot of times come from. And I really felt like, in my own experience, a lot of things that I was learning, a lot of things I was even teaching didn't line up with my own experience. And that became crystal clear. I've been in Los Angeles now for 10 years. So prior to that, I'd lived in Austin, Texas. Prior to that, I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia. And living in Los Angeles, and I live in the heart of the tourist district in Hollywood. I live a block and a half off of the Hollywood Boulevard, where the great stars on the Walk of Fame are, the Chinese Theater, where, famous, beautiful architecture, and people come from all over the world. And I really started to use this as a laboratory. Now, I know it's an extreme laboratory, right? Like, I know that this is not most people's everyday experience, but I think that's what gave me this opportunity to look at things that I had always been told, or that I had always practiced, or that I had also even taught, and started to think, that doesn't really make sense. And so that's how Asphalt Anthropology came to be. And we'll talk about some of those specifics in a minute, about, that might work in the suburbs, because you really actually never have to test that theory. So if you want to go around, and one of my pet peeves we'll talk about later is, keep your head on a swivel. That expression is just like not even possible in a more dynamic environment. But it really I want to start with stepping back and thinking about some of the big picture things with self-defense. So the first myth I would like to bust with you is that not everyone's out to get you. It's just like really that simple. We are primed, our brains are primed for picking up threats. They're primed for the anomalies. They're primed for things that are different. They're primed for that. Like, we don't even have to think about that. And then we know we're so primed for that. That's how news media makes its money, right? That's just how that works. If it bleeds, it leads, to use that old cliche. So there's a whole business around that. And, as we were talking about the self-defense industry absolutely preys on those fears, and really does want, I think, a lot of people to think that there's a big, scary world out there that you need to be afraid of. And as a self-defense instructor, I kind of take the opposite approach of that. I don't know if it makes sense, but I just feel like that's just like the conversations that I'm led to have.
That makes great sense, and it dovetails real nicely with Gavin de Becker's advice for parents about how don't talk to strangers is some of the worst advice you can give your kid.
Yeah.
And it's based on the idea that all these strangers are out to get your kid. Where what you want to have with your kid is a conversation about, if you were in trouble and you couldn't find me, which stranger would you talk to?
Exactly.
Because the overwhelming majority of people, you pick someone out at random to go talk to, they're probably going to be an okay, nice person who is not out to get you.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
So that's that like skill, or that nuance that is, I think, missing. And I see like a lot in social media, there's just like video after video of someone getting assaulted on the street. And it's just like, I've been to Skid Row, and I live in a very intense environment. And you would think that that's where these people live because it's just so overblown. And I think it's done to sell something. But that's really not, I think, how most people live. I haven't done it yet, but I really want to start a whole social media campaign where I just post the video of like nothing happening, right? But no one's going to click on that. Like, here's that same intersection. Yeah. The other 3,000 hours of the year, how I haven't done the math, but however hours are in a year, and nothing's actually happening. And that to me actually would be more interesting to watch, because that doesn't mean things aren't going on. That doesn't mean someone's not getting cased. That doesn't mean someone's not, kind of skirting danger. Maybe they just Mr. Magoo their way out of it, not realizing it. Or maybe there's some skill. So I think those are some conversations that are really missing. We like to sit back and say, oh, that person did this wrong thing. But I'm really more about studying what people are doing right. We do that a lot in Asphalt. And I've just heard some amazing stories about people who just instinctively they figure it out, right? Like this thing happens. I was working with one woman who told me a story about how her and her daughter, who was about 12, they were in, I think, the what do you call it, where the mailboxes are in their apartment. So they are in there, and this guy comes in, and there was something like vibing not right. And the 12-year-old daughter turns and says to the mom, "Hey, Dad said he was going to call, and he's going to meet us in 10 minutes, so we need to go." And the mom went with it and left, and they got away. But the crazy thing is, the dad was not in their life, so that was like not like that was the mom's clue to know that that something was off. And that brilliant 12-year-old had the presence of mind to like tag mom in such a way. And so I think we need to pay attention to a lot of those stories, because there's such wisdom out there that we so often just kind of like bow down to, big names or something like that. But there's, I think, a lot missing when we don't have those conversations. Were you gonna say something?
No, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I feel like, that no shit, there I was when nothing happened at all.
Yeah.
Is a great story to be able to tell, but it's not the story a lot of people think they want to hear.
It's not as glamorous. Yeah. I was, this was pre-COVID. I was on a train going from downtown Los Angeles back home to my neighborhood. And there was 3 young men who were in their 20s, maybe early 30s. And they clearly worked out. Like they were big, tough, buff dudes. And I was tired. I just finished workout. I got on the wrong train going to the wrong direction. And they meant to go on the same one I did. We, theirs because they're new, me because I was just being not paying attention, tired. Even when you practice situational awareness, life happens, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sitting on the train, and this guy comes around. He's like selling watches or chains or whatever he's selling, and he approaches me, and I'm like, no. So he moves on, and he moves on to these young men, and these young men, their eyes got like as big as saucers. You thought this guy was just going to start murdering them any second. And they finally were able to get him away. And I can't remember what triggered it, but I think I said to them, I was like, "Are you guys lost?" Because they were looking, I think, at the map on the wall. And they're like, "Yeah, we meant to get on the other." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I did too. I totally screwed up." So I was like, their English wasn't great. They were from Italy and Slovenia, I think. And so I was like, "Well, just, follow me, and I'll get you to the right train." But we had to ride out the rest of this train while we were there. And what was really curious to me, Jason, was one of the young men said, "You're a woman. Aren't you afraid to ride this train by yourself?" And I was like, "No, I ride it like every day, all the time. Do I keep a lookout for things? Do I, have my head buried in my phone? No, but I'm not afraid." And it was a really interesting conversation, as best as we could manage it, because they had heard all these things about how dangerous the train was. And when I was directing them where they wanted to go, and I was asking them what they wanted to do, and being young dudes, they wanted to go to the bars and drink and hang out on Hollywood Boulevard. And like, that's where let's have a conversation about danger, right? It's like whatever can happen with a monkey dance or getting rolled, getting drunk, like those are the things that you should be cautious of. But like sitting on a train and some guy approaches you, could the guy have gone south? Of course, that's possible, but it was just a real lesson to me, especially because they were so athletic looking, right? There was 3 of them, and they, like, one of them actually, we were talking about, I can't remember what they did now. One of them did jujitsu or judo, I can't remember. Must have been jujitsu. But anyway, it was just such a striking moment of how fearful these athletic young men were, just because of what they had been told. And I'm more about like, let's dig into what's actually true. What is your victim profile? What are you likely to be targeted for? I should have been more afraid being on the train than they were. And, it's just not how it worked out.
No, that's a very interesting observation, and especially who's going to come up to three
Right.
buff guys in their 20s,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Right.
That's not a lot of criminals are going to choose that particular target.
Right.
That they need to be afraid of a young woman approaching them and being friendly to them for no particular reason.
Right.
That's
Right.
the person they should have been worried about, right?
Right. Right. Oh, that actually, that's funny because
Yeah.
I remember because I was warning them about when they get to the boulevard about there's a hustle that the street vendors do where these guys, they have these CDs that they say is their music, and they'll do is they'll put it into your body, and then you clutch, and then when you clutch they let go and they're like, okay, you owe me $10. I mean, it's a little bit more skilled and nuanced than that. Oh, did you freeze? Oh, I think I might have froze. Sorry about that. Okay, so I kind of walked them through how that happens, and they didn't understand because of the English language situation. So I just kind of took off my hat and I put it in the guy's chest, and he grabbed it, and I said, "Now you owe me $10," and that's how I explained what to look out for with the DVD hustlers. So yeah, there's definitely things. I'm not saying go out there and nothing's going to happen, but just like know what to look for, know what your victim profile is, and that's going to get you 90% of the way there. Luck is definitely a part of it. I don't want to undersell that, but I'm on a roll about taking the fear out of this for folks.
No, that makes total sense. I think that unfortunately in our industry, a lot of people do sell the fear.
Mm-hmm.
And not only are most people good people, but those encounters with people who don't necessarily wish you well.
Right.
And as I think we're going to talk about a lot today is how frequently you can avoid being victimized by them.
Right.
Where with self-defense that never goes hands-on.
Right. I think, and that's actually the next thing I wanted to chat with you about, and is the idea of, and I don't really know how this happened. I scratch my head, but like, how did the physical paradigm become the dominant paradigm when it comes to self-defense? It kind of really doesn't make sense to me, particularly because I feel like the people who are most likely to be targeted are going to be the least physically, at least appearing capable of defending themselves. They're going to be smaller, they're going to be older, they're going to be, maybe a little bit inebriated or a little bit out of it. Like the guys we were just talking about, like they are not the target for me to just like walk up and rob and, like whatever. And so why is it that the physical has come to dominate? And, I don't really hear neurobiologists or sociologists or even improv actors I don't hear those leaders talking about personal safety, and they've a ton to offer. Self-defense is way more interdisciplinary than we think it is, and I think there's some lip service out there to it, but at the end of the day, I mean, I'm just going by what I see. If you Google it or you hashtag it, it's people with big beefy arms going to tell you how to mitigate a situation. And there's been twice in my life that things have gone hands-on, and I've handled way more things that never went hands-on, probably using my improv skills from theater more than anything else. Just being in the moment, understanding what's happening, going with the flow, and just staying open to like the next how do I say this, the next right thing for me to do. So that's I'm really interested in how there's a broader approach, and I'd really love to, if you were sharing with me your audience is maybe a little bit new to self-defense, honestly, go take an improv class. If we talk about young women as an example, being in a situation where she's getting hassled by a guy, a lot of times there's that freeze happening. Put them in an improv class long before that happens, and that gives them those skills to manage someone like that. Put them in a physical class too, but they're both important.
That had never occurred to me before, but that makes, yeah, absolutely. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Go take an improv class as part of your self-defense regimen.
Yes.
Like if I was still running a school, I might seriously include that in some of my black belt requirements.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
And
That's yeah.
and it's a great skill for life, like
Mhm.
whether it's for personal safety, whether it's whatever position or role you have, all of life is improv, right? All of
Mhm.
it is you've got to adapt. There is no script. I mean, look at everything that we've lived through in the past year. We're here at March 8th, I think, in
Mhm.
2021. And so we've been at this COVID thing, for a year now. And it's like we've got to figure stuff, life will come at you and you got to figure
Yeah.
it out. And improv is extraordinary for those in the moment skills when you've got somebody who is a threat to you. And um, I've been in situations. The last time I almost got jumped it was early in the pandemic, and this guy was clearly living on the streets, clearly had mental health and addiction issues, and he targeted me, and there was no way I was going to go hands on with this guy.
Yeah.
Even if I
Mhm.
quote unquote won that altercation, I'm
Mhm.
going to have to go get tested for COVID. I'm going to have to go
Yeah.
get tested for maybe hep A. I'm on the ground, I got cut by glass. There was just like no way. So I feel like because of that myth that self-defense is ruled by the physical paradigm, it shuts off our thinking to other
Mhm.
ways to approach a problem. And I really want more opportunities for people to kind of approach those challenges.
Yeah, that's a big ask, I think. I mean, nobody buys a ticket to go see a movie with Jason Statham intelligently avoiding beating somebody up, right?
Right, right,
And
right,
watch
right,
that for 2 hours. That's
right,
not
right,
going to
right,
sell
right,
movies.
right, right, right.
But yeah, that idea of one of the best things that I ever heard someone describe police work and being a soldier as is you're bored 95% of the time,
Yeah,
and the other 5% of the time you really wish you were bored.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I can
Um,
imagine.
and those are people who get into trouble professionally.
Yeah,
For us, the paradigm's more likely 99%, 1%, and yet we do spend so much time learning how to
right,
crush a trachea or stomp a knee
right, right,
or some other cool looking thing that makes us feel like Jet Li,
right.
rather than, as you say, just doing the thing and learning how to talk your way out of it.
Right. And those things are fun, don't get me wrong. And,
Yeah.
and they have other great effects on your life, in terms of your
Yeah.
health and in terms of your confidence. I don't know, I'll be honest with you. I don't know that I would have had in my life some of the adventures I've gone on if I would have had the confidence to do it. And maybe it was foolish, foolhardy confidence. I'm totally, willing to admit that. But if it opens up doors, that's fabulous. Like keep doing it. And just, again, I've had a few run-ins just by kind of the virtue of the neighborhoods I live in. I'm not a suburban girl by any means. And, I like the electricity craziness of this environment. And it just means you just got to watch things a little bit more.
Yeah.
But to your point about the Jason Statham, you're absolutely right. It's not what sells tickets, but what you just said too about the military. There's this phrase. I don't know if you've heard of this, but I heard it and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. But it comes from the military. The idea of tactics are for amateurs, logistics are for professionals.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with
Okay.
that?
This is the first time I've heard it, but I
Okay.
love it.
Okay, so what went off for me was in terms of, especially for anybody, like whether you're military, so I mean, it comes from the military, so there's wars have been lost because they can't transport things, but really that so applies to civilian life as well. So I think anyone who has a family, like your day is logistics, right? Your day is, I don't know what it looks like right now with everything with COVID, but otherwise it's like, getting kids to school, getting, food from the market, going to work, making sure dinner's made, making sure homework's done, getting to, whatever thing that you practice. Like that's just logistics. That's not like the sexy stuff in life that no one wants to talk about. But even in the military, right? Like that's like no one wants to talk about building roads and building infrastructure. And that's why, for me, a lot. I feel like I'm an urban explorer first and a self-defense instructor second,
Mhm.
because I am more focused on enjoying life and getting from A to B. Maybe boring, I have to go to work, but it's like, maybe I can get there in a new route just to kind of keep myself sharp. But it is logistics at the end of the day. And, this wasn't on my list, but, I think these checklists that we're expected to memorize from self-defense instructors, of whether it be related to situational awareness or if it's related to physical techniques, are just not realistic. I mean, anybody who's schlepping from point A to point B, and especially if you've got like kids in one hand, groceries in another, you're not going to remember that. You're more focused on the logistics at hand. And so that also informs my approach in terms of this. I practice and teach what I call street dodges, which are not going hands on and beating someone up, but more about how to physically move through the space. And once you practice them over and over, they become ingrained. So it's something as simple as you walk up, you hit the button, now with my elbow, of course, to wait for the light to change. And then I don't stand like at the edge of the curb waiting, right? Like I step back and I just take in my whole environment. One game I like to play is, if someone comes up wherever I am, if they come up behind me, is I just take your back. And I'm not really going to like assault this person, but it's just the idea of like, I'm going to own the situation. So I flip the script and I take your back. So it's just a way of kind of moving through the environment that is, like, once you do it for a time, it becomes habitual. So, and it's like, I'm not going to go hands on with this person, but I can like physically move my body from here to there.
You can just position yourself so that if you have to escape,
right,
it's easy.
right,
Because,
to escape, see what's going on, to call for help, to dodge into or run into a store. Like, it's so many more options. Yeah.
And not for nothing, not being one shove away from traffic.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. So those were 2 myths so far out of 3, and those were about how we seem to think that self-defense has to be physical, and the idea that everyone's out to get us. I'm really eager to hear number 3 now.
Okay, perfect. So the third one I have is the idea, and we talked about this, I can't remember if it was a little bit before we got started, but the idea that there is an expert out there who can tell you what to do and how to go about your life and to give you the best information. When I teach Asphalt, I have been in situations where, and how I teach the class is we talk about principles and then we walk through scenarios and have people problem solve. And I've had people come up with the most amazing ways to solve these problems that we come up with. And it really depends on them, right? Like maybe they're older, maybe they walk with a cane. I've had people in wheelchairs, maybe they have children, maybe they're pregnant. And I always have people share with me, oh, one time this thing happened to me. And Jason, the common thing I hear over and over when people tell me their stories is they say, I didn't know what to do. And then they proceed to tell me what they did. And then they're like, but I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, you did. And, I don't know if this is the fault of the industry or where this comes from, but I feel like, we put people like in the positions of expert who, and we do this a lot, I think with law enforcement, military, but that life looks nothing like my life, or it looks like nothing like the life of the people I teach. Again, it's interdisciplinary. Do they have value to contribute? Absolutely. There's tons and tons to learn. But I feel like, especially for your listeners who, again, maybe are thinking about a class or who have maybe taken one, think about broadening your scope. So to use myself as an example, I know when we were talking and I talked about how I'm about moving through dense public spaces, and you said, oh, do you have tips for families with kids? And I was like, no, I'm a child-free woman who actually really tells you how to break all the rules your parents taught you to do. That's my approach. And really, I'm the worst for that because I've been with my friends' kids who I'm watching by myself, or maybe I'm with them, And I'll tell you what, I'm a nervous wreck because I'm like, I don't know, I don't have that experience, right? I don't know how to navigate with kids. I know other principles I can move through safely by myself. But when it comes to packing little ones around, I'm not an expert. And I think that that's something that if you want to know that, talk to someone who is. And they don't have to have, a resume of law enforcement or a resume of, being a force professional. I can tell you some of the students I've worked with, they have just great stories to tell. I don't know if great is the right expression for that, but
empowering,
like
inspiring.
powerful, yeah, inspire, all of that, yeah. And so, I think again, as we think about who the experts are, if I want to know how to move through space with kids, I'm going to call moms who have successfully done that. And we need to think about too in terms of when I teach class, I have to be very mindful. I'm a middle-aged white cisgendered woman who has had physical training, and there's people that, so my experience and my advice may not be the best for someone who is a person of color or who may be LGBTQ, and so it all, how do I say it all matters, right? That's why in terms of looking at the white guy law enforcement, it's they just move through the world with different goals and with different targets on their back, and so we need to really think about that.
One of my pet peeves is the 6'2", 220-pound Marine who's going to tell an average sized woman how it is with self-defense.
Right.
It's entirely different ballgame. We actually have an episode in season 2 where I speak to I think she's a 7th Dan black belt who's 110 pounds holding a puppy, and specifically about how large athletic men, who are most of the people teaching self-defense, can teach self-defense to women of that size. It's one of the, as you say, not only is it hard to get expertise, but my expertise is going to be very different from your expertise. It's going to be very different from our next guest's expertise.
Right. And and I think that's, in the terms of self-defense, so I'm not going to tell you how to navigate with kids. I'm not an expert in trafficking. I'm not an expert in a lot of things. I'm not an expert in. I don't need to go through the list, but I know one thing I'm really good at is moving through dense public spaces and evading trouble. And so that's what I try to stay really focused on, because I have the experience and I can walk that walk and talk that talk. And if you want referrals, I've got referrals for people who are really smart on domestic violence, things like that. But I think there is a problem in the industry with the halo effect, right? Oh, that person knows this thing, then they know it all, and that's not true. And I'm not going to say a name, but I was at a training seminar with someone who's very well known, and we were having a conversation about teaching techniques, and he was saying it's worthless to teach women how to get out of a wrist grab. And he said, because women are grabbed by their shoulders. And I was like, I've been grabbed by my wrist several times, and the wrist grab, knowing how to get out, has been really helpful. And this is a person with a law enforcement background, and he kind of like had this stunned look on his face, like it just like never occurred to him. And I think that maybe he got that because I know for people who work in like domestic violence and things like that, they're told to look for bruises up here, right? Because they're absolutely grabbed there. But it kind of took out of his realm of thinking that there'd be bruises or grabbing somewhere else. And when I pushed back, he was just kind of aghast that I would disagree with him. And I think it's because he knows this thing, but he's never been a 20-something-year-old female in a club. And, I'm not that age anymore, but I've been there. And having that skill of just simply knowing how to slip out of a wrist grab, I feel like definitely de-escalated something that could have gone further. And, sometimes I feel like the grab was playful or not ill-intended. And absolutely there's times it was. But no matter what the intention was, anytime I've done it, it was always such a low impact release that it always created like this response of, oh, she knows what she's doing kind of thing. And so to kind of come back to the person who was saying, oh, you don't need to teach women, wrist grabs, they're not of value. That's the problem when we look to a certain job or a certain gender or a certain whatever. Like, you're defining the problem for me and you don't actually know what the problem is. And so how are you helping me come up with a solution? Like, yeah, I should know how to get out of grabbed up here, but this is absolutely, I can think of a half a dozen times I've used this in my life.
And I think that gets back also to our second myth about, if you're doing self-defense right, especially if you're a self-defense professional who walks that way and is aware of their environment, you have very few opportunities to test whether you're right or wrong.
Yeah.
So listen, if you've gotten this far into the show, you like what I'm doing here. So do I, but I need your help to make it all it can be. For just $10 a day, you can help this happen by supporting the show on Patreon. In return, you'll get my undying thanks, early access to episodes, a monthly safety worksheet, and other cool goodies. We're at patreon.com/safestfamily and waiting for your help. Please consider it. It's $3 a month to you, but a big deal to me. But yeah, so I absolutely agree that expertise, and I think it's also, what's the word? It's exacerbated by that sensei effect, where your students believe that you're going to do, that you know everything. You're 10 foot tall, omniscient and bulletproof. And it's hard sometimes for people to say, man, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough to be raised in a family where saying I don't know is totally acceptable. And my my great grandfather's tagline was, I don't know, but in a week we'll both know.
Oh, I love that. That's even better.
Right. But I think there are a lot of people, because that they see the look, and they're not trying to be flim flammy. They're not trying to be dishonest, but they've got this look in this 9-year-old orange belt's eyes, and they can't burst that bubble. So they give what they think is their best answer, despite having never had an opportunity to try it. Because again, who actually has an opportunity to try most self-defense, physical self-defense concepts?
Right. I kind of want to keep bringing it to something very practical for your listeners who maybe are new or have done 1 or 2 classes, and encourage them to seek out other voices and seek out people who either look more like you or maybe look nothing like you, right? So if you are a person of color, and I teach, people of color all the time. And, one thing I've learned about that tactics that have worked for me would not work for a Black woman, because I can yell at somebody and it be very received differently. And for a lot of Black women I've worked with, there's the trope of the angry Black woman. And so if I go around telling everybody that's the answer, and they know better, first of all, but even if for whatever reason they didn't, it could backfire. So, there's, again, I want to keep emphasizing how interdisciplinary and how there are many experts. So keep seeking those folks out, and just keep having different conversations. And to your point, just avoid that sensei trap or that guru trap.
Funny story from right around here that kind of illustrates your point. Recently, the cap that just walked in is his little brother's been missing for a few weeks. And that's too bad. And we were wandering around, and there's a point where circumstances led me to say to my wife, I'm a white dude with a clipboard. I can walk anywhere I want.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's my life. But if I brought that attitude into teaching self-defense to, especially like a large athletic Black man, be a very, very different situation.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really good point, because I think people, Black folks or people of color, gay folks, transgender folks, I think those are the real experts, to be honest with you. Like, how come I don't see their names and pictures on marquees? Because they are dealing with stuff, whether it be social or, a lot of social violence, right? It's coming up in their world. And, instead we're hearing from it primarily in terms of like, who the main voices are that don't fit that. And I feel like I have a lot more to learn from people, from someone who has to mitigate that every single day. And so again, just to bring it back to something very practical, you know, even if you are a person listening, watching this podcast, and you might be white, straight, you know, cisgendered, but still seek out those voices because they have a lot to teach you.
Absolutely agree. So those are three, I think. I'm not sure whether they're myths or systemic problems in the self-defense industry,
Yeah,
or
good
both.
point. Yeah. Well,
But they're
I
yeah,
think they're both,
yeah,
because
yeah,
the myth gives rise to that, right? Like we have a
mhm,
belief,
yeah,
and I've been a part of that, right? Like I will own that. Like I came through to self-defense through the martial arts world, and so
mhm,
like that's how I started teaching, and it was. I think it's that water that we're in, if we're fish, that we just almost don't see because we're just so used to it. So I appreciate having the chance to talk to you about it, because you're right, it is absolutely systemic.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a very similar background. I came up, wrestling, then Muay Thai, then Kempo, and the martial arts, and
Yeah.
it wasn't until my oldest son joined the family that I realized, I've learned a lot of stuff, but none of it solves this problem.
How does this apply? Yeah.
Right? And that's actually how this podcast came about. I'm not very bright, but I'm bright enough to listen to people who are smarter than me.
Yeah.
And so that's why I seek out folks like you.
Well, I've got
So
this little bit of knowledge. My little wedge.
and together we can make a crazy quilt, emphasize crazy,
Yes. Oh, I love
um,
that analogy.
of that will keep us warm at night. Let's
Yeah.
finish, we'll put a bow on that little analogy there. So
Yeah.
those are some three myths.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about some realities. What are some important realities that folks should remember when they're thinking about self-defense? Especially, let's paint a picture. I'm a middle class, middle-aged, more overweight than I want to be. White dude lives in the suburbs. I want to take my family to Kiev. Maybe not Kiev. That's a bit much. Let's say Bangkok.
I've been there. It's a fun place.
Yeah. Right. To Bangkok or to New York City.
Yeah.
What are some realities of that environment that we should be alert for, or that we could even leverage to keep ourselves safer?
Yeah. So wherever you're going to go, research it first, right? And for me, that's part of the fun, right? Because I love to travel. I think of cities as people, and so I want to learn as much about that that personality, if you will, before I get there. In terms of learning the language, in terms of the culture and history and things like that. So wherever you go, so I there's general things for all places, and then there's going to be specific things, right? So when we were went to Spain right before COVID shut down, I was reading about how the pickpockets, and it was just a fascinating. And now those were fun videos to watch to see how they operate. That was and it paid off actually, in learning that. But I kind of want to come back and tie it to another myth, and I kind of touched on earlier, was the idea of keeping your head on a swivel is like a pet peeve phrase of mine. And the reason I think it's not necessarily a helpful piece of advice is because of how unnuanced it is. And as far as I can find it, in terms of like the roots of that, it comes from military, but it comes from a military environment where you're going, you may be at the fob, and life is always dicey, but you're going out on a mission, right? You have to get from point A to point B, and you've got literally a target on your back. You're surrounded by enemies. And so keep your head on a swivel makes a lot of sense for that very acute point in time. And there's like great stuff from the guys who are left of bang and like all that you can definitely apply to civilian life and all that. But that idea of keeping your head on a swivel is not really achievable in everyday life. And here's what I mean by that. So when I moved to Los Angeles and moved to crazy Hollywood, I thought that keeping my head on a swivel was what I was supposed to do. But that was exhausting. It's mentally not sustainable. Oh, wait, I'm not plugged in and I'm about to die. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
I thought I was plugged in. The plug's right here. Let me make sure I don't die. Okay. So when I moved here, I thought I was doing the right thing with keeping my head on a swivel. But what you find is that you're exhausted and you're done and you're just spent, because everything here looks urgent. Everything looks like an emergency. And it's not like a very short period of time where you're out on a mission. Like every day is a mission, right? Every day is this thing. And so I've been really enjoying the neuroscience piece. I've been diving into that the last few years. And the part of our brain that processes threat, the more we like stimulate it and tell it, and it goes back to the earlier conversation, the more we tell it to be afraid and that there's all these things out to get us, it actually does a less effective job of identifying real threats. It overloads and it just doesn't work as well. And so some of the best exercises I do with clients is teaching them just to kind of how to calm down physically. Yeah, we're going to do physical techniques, things like that, but like how to just like recenter the brain, reset the brain, because then you're actually better at picking up the threat. So this whole idea of keeping your head on a swivel is counter to that idea of like letting everything chill so it can, the brain can actually work the way it's supposed to. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does.
Okay.
Have you heard Rory Miller's exposition against condition yellow?
I have not.
It's very similar.
Okay.
Viewers, you can look this up in our season 2 episode with Rory. But the bottom line being that head on a swivel, that condition yellow, that paranoid almost viewpoint of alertness,
right,
is exhausting.
Yes.
Where if we simply instead remain mindful and curious.
Yes. Yes.
And not only is that sufficient attention for most of life.
Yeah.
But we also notice the cute puppy and the pretty flowers and the lovely sunset.
Yes. Yeah. So it's exactly that, because if you walk through the world with that, head on a swivel mentality, you're absolutely missing the good stuff as well. And should you be in an environment, and this is kind of the stuff we were talking about, where you can walk around in a very safe place with your head on a swivel and think you're getting it right, but in my laboratory where I am now of my neighborhood, it's like that, like it's just exhausting. It's just like not sustainable. And so that's one of those things where, okay, I mean, if you're going to do that and that's fun for you because you want to feel like Jason Statham, I guess go for it. But it's not practical. And it comes back to, again, picking on the military, but I'm also, again, the interdisciplinary approach is that it's about logistics. It's about moving through life and not being that tactical person. And, you've got to just get from A to B. And if you can do that without a list of trying to be Jason Statham, you're just going to have an easier time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I got to tell you, speaking for parents worldwide, we're tired enough already.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. And women, I'll just tack this on. Women do not need to be told that we're a target. We don't need to be. We know.
You're aware.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are fully informed. You have been briefed.
Pretty acutely. Yeah.
But what are some other either myths or truths that we should walk into the world being more cognizant of?
Yeah. So here's another one I hope is really practical for your audience. A myth, something that we hear all the time, and that is to not look at your phone when you're out and about. And so there's a half truth to that, right? Like, I'm not advocating walking around with your head down looking at Candy Crush. I'm not saying that. But what I think is a more nuanced approach, again, if life is about logistics and you've got to get from A to B, and maybe you're picking this is my experience, I'm picking my husband up at that location, and we've got to text and we got to, like, align. Cell phones are actually a fantastic tool. So the better, I think, approach to this is, it's just bad pedagogy to say, don't look at your phone, right? People don't learn and develop new habits or break old habits by telling them not to do something. So instead, the approach I prefer for myself and when I teach is, okay, what is the best place if you need to do something with your phone? What's the best place to do that? So now we're looking at our environment in a whole new way, as opposed to, oh my God, don't look at my phone because it's scary and awful, but more like, okay, what's the best place? I need to duck in and let my friend know I'm going to be late, or I need to duck in and check the map because I got lost. So it might be ducking into a store. It might be, just stopping and putting your back to a wall. And I don't know what degree, I'm really bad with this, but not holding your phone down here, but holding it up so I still have my line of sight. So those are some real practical things that I really want to challenge folks to kind of think beyond like these rules of don't look at your phone, or just very black and white like that. It's because it's not the nature of life.
That's good parenting advice as well, where you tell your kid, don't you do that. Almost never works as well as, okay, listen, I'd rather you didn't do that, but if you're gonna do that, here are some things that I'd like you to do.
Yeah. Okay. So I know
here's the safe way to do that.
This is perfect, because I know when we were first talking, I'm like, well, I don't have parenting advice as a child-free person, but yeah, I mean, it cuts across, right? It's human nature. But the other piece of that, Jason, is, then you can have fun with your kids on that, depending on the age. I'm sure at a certain age, they want nothing to do with you and having fun. But, it's like, for me, it's a game of discovery. Like, what's a good place to look at my phone? And, if I'm on a train car and there's like a bunch of people there, not a great place maybe, but if there's one person there on the other end of the car, that's pretty cool. But then I also have to keep an eye, do things, how does the environment shift? Every time those doors open, it shifts. So it's really less about being paranoid about your environment, but just like looking for opportunity. The amygdala, which runs the threat centers of our brain, actually also is constantly seeking opportunity. And that's a part of it that we talk about less. And so I like to kind of add that in as use that to look for opportunity as well, because it just makes life more fun.
Absolutely. And that's back to that mindful, curious awareness rather than that aggressive, head on a swivel, condition yellow awareness.
Yeah.
Well, that makes good sense.
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's see. It looks like we got about time for one more good one.
Okay.
So what do you got?
So I guess this one, it's not as specific as the first two about head on a swivel on your phone, but it's more general. I think we've touched on this, is the idea of there is no like list. And I want to talk about this in a little more detail, but there's no list, whether it's for situational awareness, whether it's for tactics. There's no best list, right? It really depends on your actual environment. It depends on you. It depends on your physical abilities. It depends on all of those factors. And those things change. And again, I really want to, kind of take the whole idea that we're talking about with personal safety and like, how do we overlay that with the boring logistics of life?
Yeah.
It's so boring because we all have to deal with it, and none of us want to. But if I feel sorry for parents when I was reading a study about how it was called How Women Travel, and it was specifically on how women navigate public transportation. And as I was reading all the things that women who primarily use public transportation, they have a lot they're juggling that it's just completely unrealistic for them to handle like a list I'm going to give them. And so that's just really been a part of my inquiry in terms of, instead of a list, what is this? I'm kind of not articulating this the way I want to. I'm kind of getting lost in my thought for a second. Instead of a
train
list,
of thought got derailed briefly.
It did. I'm talking about trains and it went right off. But yeah, it's rather than a list, it's about that adaptability. It's about that being able to read the moment. And you're not going to do that with your head on a swivel and just being really regimented about it. So hopefully what people, can take away from this conversation is, the idea of adaptability, really broadening their perspective on what personal safety, what situational awareness, what self-defense are. And, if we can step away from that, I'm just going to beat the crap out of them kind of mentality, because the thing is, you're probably not, right? Like, you're probably not going to do that, especially if you've got kids in tow. So like, what are some other things? So I just want to encourage people to think about that.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So Beverly, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. And before we go, though, I have a question for you. You've taught a lot. You've been in numerous interviews. We were actually connected by a mutual friend, Andy Murphy of the Secure Dad.
He's great. Love him. Yeah, there he is.
Buy his book. It's a great book.
Yeah.
But you've given a lot of talks. You've asked a lot of questions. Is there a topic that you don't get enough of an opportunity to hold forth on?
Ooh.
And if so, please do.
Oh boy. That's a good question. And I feel like I'm not sure how to answer that, Jason, because you've given me an opportunity on this conversation right now to talk about things that I don't feel like are talked about enough in the personal safety world. So I'm always shouting about it in my blog, and I'm always shouting about it on Instagram. But I really appreciate the platform to do that, because it is such a I don't know how to say it without being overly rude, but it's just like an old boys network. And it just like blows my mind that the most vulnerable people to violence actually aren't the ones who are leading the conversation. So I guess, we've kind of talked around that, but if I could just, wrap it up by just really underlining that. And again, for folks who are listening, really look for different points of view when you're seeking out this topic.
And I'd underscore that for instructors as well, where I think one of the big things with that old boys network, as it's very, very rarely a bunch of, I think it's almost never a bunch of people being intentionally putting bad out into the world, but it's a bunch of folks who don't know what they don't know because they never asked.
Yeah.
And again, training with people with different experiences, different body types, different sizes is immensely valuable for us all.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that the MMA fad craze development in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think has done for the industry as a whole. People are much more willing to share information and compare notes now than they were, say, in the 80s and the 90s.
Oh, that's an interesting way to think of that. I hadn't considered that. Okay, I can see that.
But again, it's so often one really big cis white dude trading notes with another really big white dude.
Right. Yeah. Well, and if I could share this with your audience, I have a reading list I started. And so last year, I decided I'm just only going to read books about personal safety from women. And so I have a list on my blog, and I can share the link with you. And not all of them were directly related to self-defense, because sadly, they just don't even really exist. There's some, but they just don't really exist. But it gave me the opportunity to really branch out and just like a couple right here, visual intelligence. This is a woman who is an art historian and a lawyer who teaches people, from business people to doctors to military to all kinds of folks, how to visually interpret their world. And it's not about looking for danger, right? Which is actually what I love about it. It's what we were talking about earlier in terms of enjoying your world a bit more. And so she's great, ways, exercises and drills that I've done with just my husband, where we're drawing things that we see, and we're both terrible artists, but it's a lot of fun. So I think families might enjoy that. And so I've got Feminist City was another really good book on how women occupy space in dense urban public spaces. And so in terms of that conversation and really broadening it, if folks want to take a look at that list, I can share that link with you. And I'm always adding to it. I want to add more people of color to that list. I want to add more LGBTQIA folks to that list. Because again, I think, folks who are constantly marginalized are going to be bigger experts than white lady over here who, I've put up with some shit, but sorry, I didn't ask if I could curse.
Again, it's a parenting podcast. If we've cleaned enough of that we don't mind hearing the word.
Well, I was like, I know it's for kids. I don't know if it was the kid anyway.
No worries.
Yeah, it's really shifting, kind of coming full circle, I guess, to the conversation, like really shifting what is self-defense. And, I feel like, this book has been as instrumental in shaping my view as almost anything.
Outstanding. And yeah, I think if there's been a through line of this whole conversation, it's about re-evaluating what we think self-defense is. Because
Yeah.
that might be the biggest myth, that
Yeah.
what we prepare for, what we think of as self-defense, even from something as simple as, like you talked about, so many people saying, I didn't know what to do, and then told a story about how they did the exact right thing
Yeah. Yeah.
because they didn't realize that talking their way out of it and getting in the car, locking the door, and going home to enjoy a beer with their family was self-defense.
Right. 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 Absolutely. Well, and I think it's interesting too. You brought up the point of what is self-defense, because we do have this. Like again, if you Google it, there's very particular images come up of people, throwing punches, all this stuff. And speaking as a white female who is a professional, like that can look like a lot of other things than somebody jumping out at me, behind the bushes or that kind of thing. The irony is my focus is on street safety because that's what I enjoy. I love exploring and I can speak to that. But frankly, that is where the least amount of harm comes to folks. It usually comes to folks from people at the hands of people they know in the form of domestic violence. It comes at the hands of people they trust in terms with children and teachers. And so those are the red flags. Those are the patterns that absolutely all parents should be aware of and learning. And then because whether you're a kid or you're an adult person, you're going to have to navigate those creepy bosses or those kinds of situations. So we've spent our time here talking about street violence just because that's my niche. But I talk about that with the full understanding that people are harmed by people they know more than anything, and that's where I think if you're going to have real change, it's got to take place at that level.
Absolutely. Just last week, we aired an interview with the SVU captain from Ocean City, New Jersey, and
Yeah.
I had approached her about, hey, could we have a talk about child lures? And her response was, no, we're going to talk about people your kids know victimizing them because that's overwhelmingly how it happens.
Yeah.
And we had the most depressing episode that I've had on this show, but also one of the most informative.
Yeah, I'm really glad those are hard conversations to have. And you're right. Everybody wants to have that conversation about looking like Jason Statham, but it's not that great. It's actually harder than that. And that's not my area. I know bits from what I've learned from colleagues, but it's, I can happily refer you, but that's the conversation that needs to have. And just to kind of get on my super feminist bandwagon here in terms of, what we say about people about the cities and dense urban public environments is, I feel like in a lot of ways, the self-defense industry is a tool for actually keeping people fearful, whether that's intentional or not. And I think there's all kinds of, people having different intentions. But cities are where actually people can come and have more opportunity, and not to knock your suburbs, but they're actually harder to live there, right? You have to have 2 cars. It's much more expensive in many ways. In my life, we walk just about everywhere. I do keep a car, but I it's just like, there's more job opportunities here. And I think when we scare people, particularly women, out of an environment that they could thrive in, we're doing them a great disservice. And so that's part of my plot to subvert the self-defense industry, is to really shake that up, because you're not doing women favors by telling them people are going to jump out of the bushes and get you. And then just to kind of shift it back to what you were saying, it's like, if you're going to tell women that, then you need to stop telling kids to go play sports. You need to tell them to stop going to church, because that's where the perverts hang out. And I'm not advocating for that really, but it's just like, it's the same kind of messaging. But instead, let's have the conversations you were having with this amazing captain of like what are those red flags?
And you had mentioned it before about the difference between don't do that and, well, let's do that. There are some risks.
Yeah.
And here's how we mitigate those risks and overcome them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Beverly, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. We'll be sure to get that book list in the show notes, because I think a lot of our viewers will find that to be an amazing resource.
Great.
So thank you so much. And stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Today's episode was brought to you by our heroes over at Patreon. Todd Elner, Beth Edwards, Douglas Sedovey, Hugh O'Donnell, Art Brick, American Institutes of Kenpo, Beth Pratt, Richard Hubbard, Wayfinder Advantage, Kit Bradley, Lee Douglas, Amy Rivers, Neil Fastine, Kate Carlson, Brom Payton, Jenny Coakley, and Chris Jordan. Join the illustrious heroes by backing us at patreon.com/safestfamily. If you can't, that's okay, but do consider liking us and subscribing here on YouTube or sharing your favorite episodes on social media. Even a little bit on your end can make a lot of difference here. Thank you for watching today. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.